Hey guys, Chris from Provo Beast Audio Installation, and in today's video we're doing a backup camera on this 2016 Mitsubishi Lancer. Now in this install we're going to show you how to integrate this camera to an existing aftermarket radio. Let's get started. Before we jump into things, a couple of things to note. Some Lancers actually came equipped with an OEM camera. This happens to be a base trim, so there was no camera included or integrated into this vehicle before we replaced the radio in the first video. If you have an OEM camera and you're trying to retain that camera, check out our first video where we'll link the part needed to retain that factory camera with your new aftermarket radio. So without further ado, let's head to the bench to show you the parts that we're going to need for the install. Here at the bench, parts we're using today is this license plate mountable camera, which is by Autovox. And more or less, this camera makes it really easy because you don't have to drill and mount the camera manually. It comes with a license plate bracket that generally goes back behind the plate. And it has a nice camera there where you'll feed that through the trunk lid, or in this case, it happens to be the bumper, into the bumper, and it connects into your extension harness. It'll connect into here, and then this will go all the way up to your aftermarket radio or whatever display is going to show the analog video output. Now in this case, we're going to be wiring our camera in one of two ways. Wiring configuration number one is generally the easiest, where essentially all you're doing is powering this camera on the reverse light, power and ground only. The nice thing about that is there's no extra wiring needed. More or less, all you connect is your power and ground to the reverse lights, power and ground. That'll power the camera whenever those lights are on. And at the same time, this red also passes through this little pigtail on the end, where this will be your reverse gear trigger wire going to the radio's reverse gear trigger wire, which will automatically cycle over that radio to display that camera whenever you're backing up. Again, that's the easiest way. It's actually fairly straightforward, but there are drawbacks, as oftentimes your aftermarket radio has the functionality to display that camera at any time. If we only power the camera on reverse, as soon as you call upon that camera when you're not backing up, you're not going to get any image. That's the downside of that wiring configuration. Option number two would be powering our camera off of accessory power, where the camera is going to be running whenever the radio is on. And that allows us to use the camera at any time in addition to just being in reverse. Now we're going to actually repurpose the trigger wire. Instead of feeding a trigger into the radio, we're going to send accessory back into the harness. We'll cap this end off. And so this is going to power the camera off of accessory. We'll ground it there. And more or less what that will do is allow that camera to be on whenever the radio is on. The downside of this method too is we've now taken this trigger wire, and now we no longer have an easy trigger wire to connect to our radio. We still have to tell our radio when we're backing up. So usually in wire configuration number two, we have to run another wire with it. That wire will connect to the reverse light positive. We'll run it along with our camera wiring, connect that to the radio. So it just really depends how involved you want to get here. Last note here, if you are going to run a camera off of accessory, choose a camera without LEDs. You don't want those LEDs on whenever the radio's on. That could be dangerous at night if you have a camera with LEDs powered on accessory. First thing we're going to do, we're going to grab our camera, let's head to the car and go ahead and get it installed. We'll pass this wire through the bumper into the trunk area. So we got our camera mounted, we fished the wire through the bumper. Now there's a grommet right in here that we opened up so we can pull our wire out. But you don't necessarily have to take off this piece. This just gives us more playroom with all our carpet here. We need to poke a hole through the grommet so this can pass through the grommet, not be pinched between the grommet and the sheet metal. And then at this point in time, we need to connect our extension harness and start pulling our wire forward. Now here inside your trunk, if you pull this down, you have this harness which comes down from the deck lid. Now there is a white wire, and that's going to be your reverse gear trigger wire. And you could look to see what's down here and find it further up the line, but that's where you can use either to power your camera or use this as a trigger wire. Black is your ground, white is your reverse gear trigger wire. So just remember that as you're getting this all wired up here to make your two connections. Now in our case, since we're powering our camera off of accessory, we'll power our camera up front, but we still need to ground it. So we'll ground our camera to this black wire. The white wire, we need to run another extra wire along with our camera as the trigger, because remember, we're going to reutilize the trigger wire as a way for us to power on accessory. So those are our two connections here, and then everything else will connect up at the radio. So we're going to grab our extension harness here and start making our connections. Okay, so we went ahead and prepared our wiring here. Now, what we did back here is made our two connections. We use T-taps in this situation. So black is our ground, and then our reverse trigger is white. Since we're not powering our camera here, we went ahead and capped off from the power harness of the camera, the red wire, because this will see accessory. We don't want that to ground out on anything. So we tied that off there, ground went to ground, and then an extra, because we're reutilizing the trigger, we have to run a new one. Our purple wire along with our video cable, it's going to go forward. So purple wire goes in the reverse trigger. Then from that point forward, it's more or less, we tape that about every six inches or so. And this is going to snake all the way forward along kick panels, all the way into the dash cavity. Here's where our video wire passed on through from the camera. Zip tied it up along. This is where our video cable connects into the extension harness. There's our connections. Now we're going to go up and around. So we went ahead and tucked our video cable and our trigger wire just up and around. We just tucked it down along. And now we are at the point where it's just come out there, just tucking up underneath the panels. The wire gauge itself, it's small enough where we don't necessarily have to pull panels to run the wire up here. Now this one's already pulled apart. This actually was pulled apart when the vehicle arrived, but it's more or less just a couple of clips down there. They're super easy to remove, but because it's up and out of the way, we're going to use this channel to run our wire. With our wiring all done here in the trunk, at this point, we can go ahead and put our license plate back on. All right, so we pulled our reverse gear trigger wire as well as our video cable up into the dash. From that kick panel, just fished it through the dash, and here we are in the dash cavity. Obviously, our radio's not in here. We didn't show that in this video because we covered that in such great detail in the first video, which more or less walks you through the process of replacing the factory one, how to disassemble the dash and everything like that. We can link that video in the description at your convenience. Now picking up there, we're going to grab the wiring harness adapter that we prepared in our first video. We have two connections off there. We have a purple-white, which is our reverse gear trigger wire for our Pioneer that we're installing. And we're going to go ahead and put our trigger wire that we tapped into that harness in the rear. We're going to tap that into the reverse gear trigger wire input, and that's going to tell the radio to be in reverse and show the camera as soon as you're backing up. Now we also provided a accessory off of the harness as well. It's just teed into our red wire that runs through this harness, and we showed that in the first video as well. And that's going to power our camera. We're going to grab the little pigtail that we've repurposed to be our power wire for our camera. And this is going to send that accessory all the way back and power the camera whenever the radio is on. So we went ahead and made our connection there. And then this end goes into the camera input on the back of the radio. So at this point in time, we can go ahead and get the radio all reassembled. We're going to grab our camera connection to the camera input. Now on this specific Pioneer, it's actually brown. It's a brown RCA input. All right, so with the radio all back in, now it's always a good idea you go into your settings to ensure that the camera is turned on. Oftentimes it's not. In our camera settings, our camera is set to on, and the polarity, specifically on this radio, is set to battery. We're good there. So at this point in time, with the car on, let's go ahead and put it in reverse. Perfect. Looks great. Let's go and pull it out of reverse. Excellent. Works out really, really nice. Now, because we wired the camera off of accessory, if we go home here, this radio has the option to view the camera at any time. So that's a really nice benefit, alternative to just wiring the camera on reverse. So if we're going down the highway, whatever we need to, we can call upon the camera whenever we like. So that's about it for this install. Obviously, like I said before, we didn't show you the radio install side, so we'll link that video specifically in the description at your convenience, along with all the parts that we used in today's install. Be sure to hit the like button if you liked what you saw, and don't forget to subscribe. It posts great content on the channel all the time. We'll see you in the next video.